Hello and welcome to the first video of 2025. We're kicking off the new year with some Trench Crusade. This was recently the highest winning vote on the poll that I conducted, and we're looking at the Heavy Mechanized Infantry. I recently got my batch of STLs from the Trench Crusade Kickstarter, and so I've been firing up the printer all weekend. You can kind of see that some of these are in the red clear resin, some of them in the gray. I was just trying to use up some of the red. And I'm starting off by priming these guys in my usual method of black all over and then a white from roughly 45 degrees. I'm going for a kind of militarized World War I tank look to these guys. I'm going to be trying to match the concept art as close as possible. And so I'm using a dark green gray and I'm running this through the airbrush. Now I could have applied this with a brush, but I just want to save some time. And once I've got full coverage of this, it does seem kind of silly to cover up the zenithal, but you can kind of see that the green does interact just very subtly different between the black and the white. It's very difficult to see, but there is a slight difference in tone. And then I decided to try out the Fanatic range. This is plate mail metal. And I'm just giving these a go just to see if it's kind of a nicer metallic paint. And yes, these are great metallics. Just from the small interaction that I've had with them, they're really, really soft and clean. They don't have the kind of paint flecks in them as much as some other metallic paints. And these went on really nicely. I'm switching over to my tried and true scale color metallics. So here I'm using old copper for these kind of tanks on the back of the backpack here. The plan is to lay down as many flats as I can, and then I'm going to give the whole model a wash with an enamel wash. I'm switching over to Victorian brass, and this is a very similar color to the old copper, but it just has just the right amount of gold in it to kind of distinguish itself. And so I'm using this for this kind of exhaust chimney stack. I'm not spending too much time on the kind of prep work. I just want to get to the wash because I want to see how that interacts with the sculpt of the model. And here's some Grim Black speed paint. For now, I'm just giving this a quick once over on the weapons. I don't care that there's kind of green underneath because I'm going to end up doing some other stuff to these weapons anyway. So for right now, I'm just doing a quick coat of the speed paint on the weapon itself just to kind of tone it black in preparation for some other colors later on. I'm also doing this for the halberd and the hammer as well. For the wash, I'm going to be using AK's dark brown for green vehicles. This is a perfect wash for Trench Crusade because it's got a lot of militaristic colors, and this brown wash works really well with that kind of dark green. So I'm applying this enamel wash all over the model and just getting a nice thick coverage. And then with the odorless spirits, and then going in and pulling away those areas that I want that color to come back through. This is kind of painting a wash in reverse almost. But what it does is it creates a really nice deep wash that you could get with, say, a dark brown like Agrax Earthshade, but it takes a while to kind of build up those shadows. And then once that's dried overnight, you can kind of see it's left a nice pattern, but it's also shaded those recesses really nicely and given the whole miniature a grimy appearance. And now I'm going to be using some Mephiston Red. Now, I should have really done the markings beforehand. I got kind of excited and eager and just wanted to get the wash on these guys. So with that Mephiston Red, I'm just very carefully penciling in these markings, just kind of sketching in the rough shape using the paintbrush. And then rather than just filling the shape entirely, I'm kind of dabbing on the paint to kind of start to build in some paint chipping, like it's been kind of worn away or scratched off. I'm using Averland Sunset for the arrow detail, and to achieve that I'm just doing 3 lines, so a thin line up the middle here and then 2 side lines that kind of go to the point and create that arrow shape. And then once I'm happy with that, I'll then do a line across the bottom here just to complete out the arrow. You can see I've made a couple mistakes, so I'm going to take that original green-gray and just go back in and tidy up those edges. Just taking my time and cleaning up any of these kind of stray brush strokes And then I decided to thin out the shield just a little bit and center it back into the shoulder pad. Here's some Mojave white. And I decided to add some markings to the shield. So I used some reference and looked up some old World War I tank markings, and I discovered this motif. And what's really cool about this is that back in World War I, British troops would use this striping pattern to distinguish themselves from German captured tanks. So I love adding this tiny little detail to my own troops and making up this kind of in-game headcanon almost for these mechanized troopers. And I also recently discovered that Warhammer's been using this marking as well, so it's kind of this cool little tie-in between these franchises. I'm going back in with that Mojave white and just adding a little bit of chipping here. I'm just kind of spattering on the brush just to kind of create a randomized pattern. And then back in with the green to kind of break up that white as well. This helps add a little bit of realism, but also it can kind of disguise some kind of wobbly lines that maybe wouldn't have been the most accurate. Here I've decided to add another insignia that I found on some reference material. And so I started off by just creating some dots to help me guide this square that I'm painting, and then filling in the lines, and then finally filling in that shape. Here I'm adding an Ace of Spades insignia. What's really fun about these is that you kind of have to break it down into basic shapes, and then kind of work your way up to the pattern. I find that works the best. And you can just take your time going back and forth, switching out colors and tidying up the lines. As I said earlier, this probably would have been easier if I'd have painted it first and then added the wash on top, but I kind of like the vibrancy of the paint without the wash. And then I decided to add some highlights to the armor, and so this is that initial dark green gray. And rather than using brush strokes for this, I've got this old brush that's kind of frayed and pretty crappy, so I'm just dabbing this on and creating almost like a stippled effect. And this is great because it's cleaning up those areas where the wash maybe would have settled on the surface a little too much, and reintroducing the idea of it being a shadow. I'm mixing in some green sky and just kind of mixing this in stages. So this is the dark green gray with just a little bit of green sky mixed in, and I'm slowly building up that highlight. I'm dabbing the brush on, but I'm doing it in smaller and smaller areas, and really just focusing on the upper part of the mech and anywhere that there's like a sharp edge. I've decided that I want to add just one more highlight to the legs, just to kind of help them pop from the silhouette a little bit. And just finally going around, just using up as much as I can on the brush. And then I've mixed in some more green sky. And really now I'm just focusing this on the front of the chest, the shoulders, and the head. And I'm just taking my time, just building up these highlights, still using this kind of stippling effect. This is going to help to add to that tank paint texture, but it's also going to kind of disguise a lot of these brush strokes. Finally, this is pure green sky, and I'm just using this for very, very small dabs on the shoulders, the head, and kind of on the edges of some of the metal. I'm also easing up on the pressure as well. I don't want to push too hard because that will create a wider surface area. So you can kind of see this is a very, very small, delicate amount of pressure I'm adding. And then finally, I decided to do an edge highlight to just the rim around the visor because I want to pull focus to the face of the model. And then just adding a couple edge highlights to the shield here. Next up is Kalahari Orange. Now the concept art has this great rusted metal appearance, and I'm going to try to replicate that. So I'm taking that Kalahari Orange and just kind of dabbing it onto the edges of the armor. I'm not trying to cover the whole edge. I don't want to kind of overshadow some of the shading that I've got going on. So I'm just kind of choosing some moments here and just dabbing on this orange to try to get across the idea that these are really old rusted plates of metal. These guys are really the heavies of the new Antioch army, and so I really want to accentuate the battle damage that's on the sculpts and really make them feel these like they're big hulking mech suits. So the great thing about weathering like this is that you just get to choose to apply as much as you want without going overboard. Finally, I've thinned that Kalahari orange right the way down, and I'm just using that and letting that sink into the recesses on the chainmail. I imagine these guys have been stuck in the trenches for ages, so just everything's just covered in mud and rain. I'm going to get the bases prepped, so I'm using a variety of supplies here, like these tiny little coffee stirrers. And I'm starting off by just gluing some rocks onto the bases. And what this is going to allow me to do is just kind of add some depth and height to the bases. And for that, I'm using AK's Wet Ground. This is one of my more favorite mud paints, if you like, and this has kind of a gloss built in, so when this dries, it'll actually dry really glossy like a wet, glistening mud. And then I'm going to take some of those little sticks and just push them into the base. The mud will kind of dry and hold it in place there. And this will eventually give the impression of duckboards on a trench. I'm taking some barbed wire and just kind of curling this around these needle nose pliers. And then I'm going to do the same thing I did with the boards, which is just to push them into place, just into that mud while it's still wet. And then just cover it up with a little bit more mud. And that will really cement it in once it dries. And because it's buried in the mud, it doesn't look like it's just been glued on top. And once that's dry, I just do a final check just to make sure that everything is really solid. I'm adding that same AK wash that we used for the mech armor and just letting that soak into these pieces of wood here. This really does stain the wood really nicely. And then I'm going to take that wash again and just take the shine off of the wire. Here we got some bright neutral grey, and I'm just very quickly adding a dry brush to the machine gun. I just want to pull out some details but not spend too much time on highlighting. And then I decided to go just the extra mile on these guys, and I'm going to add a furnace to the backpack, so I'm prepping that with some white. I'm going to be using some fluorescent paints, so this is a grey undercoat, and you can kind of see this is thinned down just a little bit so it sinks in. Here's some neutral grey, and for now I'm just going to add just a little bit of neutral grey to the melee weapons. I'm going to attempt some non-metallic metal appearance, but if you just wanted to use a metallic paint, that would totally work in this case. Once that's on there, I was kind of flirting with the idea of maybe a brass or a gold, but I decided to go for a silver. And then I'm blending in some of that bright neutral grey and just starting to add some non-metallic highlights. My preferred white is bold titanium white, and I'm just mixing this in, building up a grayscale on my palette, and then slowly building up to that white color. For the darker recesses, I'm using coal black, mixing that into that neutral grey, creating some dark shades, and then just using those on the axe. I've got no real true method for this. I'm just kind of throwing on different shades and seeing how it looks, and kind of wet blending between the two shades as much as I can. Finally, I use that bold titanium white and just add a couple scratches, just breaking up the gradient. And what it does is it kind of creates the appearance of being shiny and metallic without having to use a metallic paint. Next up is some Zealot yellow, and like I said, I'm just going to go an extra 10% on these guys and create kind of a furnace look to this backpack. So this is the yellow, and then I'm using fluorescent red and applying that to the top half of the backpack. I'm not too worried about overspill or anything, I just want to get the color and just cover up that white. And then with a clean brush, I'm going to blend between the two colors. And because they're still wet, it kind of makes an orange in-between color. I mixed in just a little bit of black into the fluorescent red to create a darker shade, and then I'm just going to use this for the top half of these vents here. This kind of creates the impression that it's really hot and there's like a fire inside. And then I mix some of that Averland yellow into the dark green grey, and I'm making kind of a yellowy green highlight. I'm just adding this around the edge just to kind of imply that this is super hot and there's almost like a glow coming from this furnace. Finally, I'm going to be using some Ratling grime, and I'm just going to highlight some of these smaller details like the tubes on the back of the backpack. You could totally use that grim black from earlier. I'd forgotten I'd used it, so I switched over to this and just kind of threw this on. I wasn't too worried about detail here. And then I'm using that same Ratling grime for the exhaust. I'm kind of implying that it's billowing smoke or it's covered in soot. Here's some Iroko, and I'm just using this to dry brush some of these boards. I wanted to pull them away from the mud texture, but not highlight them too much that they're just a bit distracting. And then I also recently picked up this Splatter effect stirred earth from AK, and I decided to give it a go. So this is that same kind of old crappy brush, and I'm just dabbing this on to the feet. This is a slightly brighter shade than the mud itself, but it kind of implies that the mud is dried. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm then going to apply it to the weapons as well. Again, subtlety is kind of the name of these guys. I didn't want to go overboard. I really could have just covered these guys in blood and mud and stuff, but I wanted to still kind of show the paint job underneath. And then finally, a black rim around the base. And here they are, the big boys, the Mechanized Heavy Infantry. These are really cool and really fun, and I'm super happy these were first on the list. I'm still really looking forward to a lot of the other units from Trench Crusade, but these guys were already kind of an easy paint job in my mind, so I was really happy to see these come to fruition. I really enjoyed the stippling paint scheme. It was kind of a quick and easy idea, but it really does look like a really old paint that's been worn off. And yeah, I may end up using that in the future for a lot of the other models. As always, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you think I was able to capture the spirit of Trench Crusade? I know that the Artillery Witch was next on the list, and I've got some really cool plans for her. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, like the video, that really helps me out, and I'll see you all in the trenches next time.